Time. Bruce and I have a common background. We both finished in physics at a time, and as undergraduates at a time when there were no jobs and what looked like no future. So we wandered into different career paths, but for a while we may have overlapped in nuclear medicine. Bruce, you graduated from Michigan, and then got your doctorate in medical physics at University of Wisconsin in 1989, and has been stuck here ever since.
Actually, well before.
Well before.
Yeah.
But I became a pediatrician, and the last thing I did in nuclear medicine was a paper on rubidium-81M.
Whoa. Good.
But that was in 1970 when you were finishing. But Bruce has been working with an interest in cancer.
Well, yes, mostly.
And that's sort of where he got started in this, and been working with dosimetry and imaging. And I think he's going to tell us a little bit about his life as one of the people who's behind a lot of the technology that we use in medicine today.
Thank you. Yeah.
So here's Bruce.
Thank you. Thank you. And just for the record, I am a professor emeritus at University of Wisconsin, and I'm also the president for the Center for the Assessment of Radiological Sciences, which is a patient safety organization listed with. Can you hear me better now? Take your mask off. What's that? Make it louder. How do you make this louder?
You need to stay closer to the microphone.
Oh, just stay
and
close.
You need to project more. Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear better now? Yeah. All right. There we go. The Center for the Assessment of Radiological Sciences is a patient safety organization listed with the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality to help healthcare facilities improve their quality and prevent errors. Now, don't know what a medical physicist is? Don't feel bad. I didn't know what medical physics was in 1970 when I graduated, and 2 weeks later, I was wrong. A friend of mine's father was a radiologist at Henry Ford Hospital and suggested I come and talk with their physicist. I said, physicist in a hospital? What's that? So I went down on my motorcycle in a t-shirt and blue jeans, helmet under my arm, and showed up and found out that I was actually in a job interview because they had a residency program. One of the residents who was showing me around was just finishing. They had an opening, and for whatever reason, they selected me as I was in the program. And 2 more weeks after that, I was teaching medical physics. Oh my. Times have changed a bit on that. The field came into being in those days in the late 1890s when physics was just exploding with new things. And one of them in 1895 was Wilhelm Röntgen's discovery of X-rays. Quite accidentally, as a lot of this stuff was, but that changed medicine and physics forever. You can see on this slide, Röntgen on the left, and the first X-ray that he did of his wife's hand in the middle, which isn't a bad X-ray, actually, although it took a long time. This on the right is a typical setup for a chest X-ray in those days. Something like that would take about 3 hours. So if you go in for an MR and you're complaining about the time, think about that. He won the first Nobel Prize in 1901, not just the first in physics, which he did, but the very first Nobel Prize ever. There were others that were given in 1901, but there was quite a time delay between his and the next. There we go. That 3 hours was cut considerably by the work of this guy, William Coolidge, who invented the tungsten filament in 1912, which allowed the development of incandescent light bulbs, and then invented a vacuum tube with an anode and a hot filament in 1913, which was the basis for modern X-ray tubes, and then invented a rotating X-ray, which was a way to dissipate the heat that was built up during X-rays so that you could increase the current and cut the time. And actually, the X-ray tubes that he made had about the same characteristics as they did for much of the next century. He did not win the Nobel Prize, but he made an awful lot of money off of 85 patents. Radioactivity was discovered in 1896, just a year after Roentgen found the X-rays, by this guy, Henri Becquerel. He found it accidentally too, in that he was studying the chemical characteristics of pitchblende, which is an ore with uranium, and tossed his sample in a drawer on top of an unexposed film, and came back some time later and just exposed the film because he thought it was probably going to be too old, and noticed that it had an image of the rock on it. And since he knew about Roentgen's discovery, he started looking into what this was that was exposing the film. And he, along with the Curies who came to work with him, discovered radioactivity. And Pierre won along with Becquerel, won the Nobel Prize in 1903 for that discovery, the three of them. They almost didn't want to give it to Marie because, after all, she was a woman. But she couldn't possibly have had anything to do with this, really. They didn't know who they were messing with, by the way. Marie Curie also became the first of 4 people so far to win 2 Nobel Prizes, the second in 1911, for the isolation of radium and polonium. This is a picture of her and Pierre. Pierre was dead by that time, run over by a milk cart. That's their daughter, Irene, in the middle. The daughter won a Nobel Prize in 1935, which made the 4 Nobel Prizes in that family, with Marie and Pierre having each one in the beginning. Do we count Marie Curie as really a medical physicist? Absolutely, because she worked during World War I, developing mobile X-ray units that they could take around in the field. And she drove these X-ray machines to the fronts to X-ray injured soldiers. She really was a medical physicist at that time. But what is medical physics? Well, it's simply the application of physics in medicine and biology. Duh. Most medical physicists work in the application of radiation in imaging and, for diagnosis and treatment of disease, mostly radiotherapy. But others work in things like microscopy or nanoparticle treatment in various diseases. Some are working in AI and are leaders in the artificial intelligence field. There are some related fields that are not medical physics, health physics for one, which is protecting people from radiation hazards. I'm also a health physicist, spent 25 years as the chair of the university's Radiation Safety Committee and worked with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on a lot of issues dealing with radiation protection. Biophysics was investigating the physics, mostly of physiology, often on the microscopic level, and is a lot of times just a mix of molecular biology, physical chemistry, and physics. One of my best friends and sometimes roommate in college became a biophysicist, or was a biophysicist from the University of Michigan, and got a very good job in the post office for a long time. Actually, biophysicists were in a great deal of demand at the time because people realized they were working with how things moved across the cell membrane, and drug companies were very interested in things like that. Biomedical engineering. And this is application of engineering in medicine. Things like artificial limbs, artificial business, biosensors. When you get an EKG, it was developed by a biomedical engineer. I also worked in the biomedical engineering department here. I had an appointment there because I was doing some work in robotics. So if we go back to medical physics, we noted most medical physicists work in radiotherapy and imaging. About 70% of the medical physicists are in radiotherapy, about 20% in imaging, about 10%, actually not. It's a lot less than 10%, but let's round that out, in nuclear medicine. And nowadays, all radiotherapy is image guided, so there's a lot of work between these different fields. And I worked in all of these fields. Back when I grew up in medical physics, there weren't as big of a distinction. Everybody did everything. But I spent much of my, my professional work in the radiotherapy clinic, although I did a lot of work in nuclear medicine and imaging also here. But let's look at what are the imaging modalities and what do medical physicists have to do with it. This is just a radiograph looking like something you might have seen in the picture with Roentgen. They've come a long way in what they can do. CTs were developed in around 1970. 1972, I saw my first unit and said, boy, do I want one of those. You could suddenly see all the organs inside people. And it was just amazing. And it changed markedly radiotherapy because before we would take a wire, a solder wire, and wrap it around the patient, and that was the contour of the patient. And that's the good as we could get for defining where the patient was. Could we find the tumor? Well, approximately. MR was another great step, just showing soft tissue wonderfully. Oh, by the way, the CT was invented by a physicist, Hounsfield, who got a Nobel for that one. MR was invented by several physicists. I don't remember if they got a Nobel for that, but certainly when that came out, boy, did I want one of those too, because now you could so much better see the different tissues on the inside. Ultrasound was up and coming in 1970. We had one of the very early ones in my residency. Nobody knew what to do with it. The images people thought looked like weather patterns. So what do you do with all that? It's come a long way too, is a routine and very portable imaging system. And nuclear medicine imaging, which has gone through many ups and downs, and right now is on a full upward path. One reason, and we'll get to that in just a little bit with the radiotherapy, is the image you see right there. Nuclear medicine is using a radio tracer that will go to cancers wherever they are in the body. And so you can use nuclear medicine scans to find all the disease. So what do medical physicists do in imaging? Well, other than developing the modalities, which is a fun part of what we do, we work a lot at improving the modalities, making the images clearer, sharper, reducing the artifacts in the images, speeding the image process, which all of the processes people think take too long, so we try to make them faster. And we provide quality assurance for the processes, measurements to make sure the machines are working well, doing what they're supposed to do. We help with special patient cases and interpretation in those cases. And a lot of us will counsel patients who are concerned about radiation that they might get from a radiation study. What do we do in radiotherapy? I haven't shown you those devices yet, but let's talk about what we do. We develop better ways to deliver the dose of radiation to the undesirable cells in the body while preserving the good cells, trying not to injure them. And we do this by improving the differential dose delivered to tumors compared with normal tissue. And we do this with physical processes, how to bring beams in, how to better exclude normal tissues, what energies of beams to use. And this is getting more radiation on the target and less elsewhere. We also use radiobiology to change the treatment parameters in order to make the tumors more susceptible to being killed by the radiation and the normal tissue cells less. And just like with imaging, we do a lot of quality assurance for the processes. So what are the modalities? There's external beam. This is a picture from the advertisement for this talk. This is a linear accelerator. It accelerates electrons to a very high speed, slams them into a target, making X-rays, or we just use the electrons themselves, depending on what we're trying to treat. And those X-rays are then what we treat the patients with. In external beam, you've got these beams. Kolot-60 was like that. It was a big radioactive source, and they had in a machine that looked a lot like that LINAC. They shoot the beam from outside the patient into the patient and try to focus a number of beams on the target. Whoop. Let's see, I guess I said all of that. That red arrow is pointing to an imaging system that's part of this accelerator. And all accelerators nowadays have built into them an imaging panel in the back, and they can use it to take a picture of the X-rays going through the patient, or to do a CT right there with the patient in place by spinning this around the patient. And I said, will sculpt the energy of the radiation and the type of the radiation to the patient. This is showing different energy X-ray beams going off from the left to the right as we go deeper into the patient. And this is showing what the dose is as we do that. This is called a depth dose curve. That top green curve is a 18 MV X-ray beam. And the lowest one, the red one there, is a 6 MV. Congregated towards the left of this graph are those same types of curves for electrons, that is, in using the electrons that you've accelerated directly without turning them into X-rays. And those are all different energies. And we'll use those to treat disease that's closer to the patient's skin, because it'll just go to the depth we need to treat it, and then you can see it falls to almost nothing. So stuff behind the target get very low doses of radiation. This is a multi-leaf collimator. This is looking up, if you were the patient, looking up into the radiation beam. And we use all these little metallic strips that are in the picture on the left, going up and down to shape the field for matching the tumor as is seen from this angle of the beam. And as we treat the patients, we'll move the beam around the patient, and as the gantry moves around the patient, those little leaves move in and out of the field, changing the shape so that whatever direction the beam's coming from, it matches the target. Again, medical physicists did that. And this is just showing an illustration on the left of a time-lapse picture with the gantry going around the patient. And the little red things that in many cases look like Valentine hearts are the shape of the beam at those various angles. And so you can see that the shape of the beam as you go around changes to match the needs of the patient. On the right is the dose distribution. Superimposed on that patient's CT with the higher dose regions in red. And you can see they're all concentrated right in the middle where the cancer was. You get very low doses, that's the blue is cold, as you go away from the tumor. Not only do they have these gantries that spin around the patient, robotics have gotten into this too. This is a CyberKnife where you have a linear accelerator on an arm. That's a big flat thing that's right over the patient at the moment. That will move in not just planar spinning around the patient, but in any angle that it takes to bring the beam in to hit the cancer. And so you aren't constrained just by the planes that the LINAC can do. You can come in from any direction. We also are using protons. These are the the hydrogen nucleus is also basic building block of the nucleus. You can accelerate these in a cyclotron and shoot them into a patient. On the right, you can see the depth dose curves, just like we were looking at with the X-rays and the electrons. The proton is the one that starts off low, and then as it goes to the right, it moves up and up and up until you get to a point called the Bragg peak, where it stops. The proton gives off its energy all the way as it's going into the patient to that point, and the break peak is where it's run out of energy. Anything beyond that doesn't get dosed. You can sweep that break peak where you've got the highest dose through the patient, getting what it says on the slide is a spread out break peak to cover a tumor at some depth. You can then treat the patient with fewer beams and usually with higher precision of where the beams are going. On the left is a comparison of a photon beam called IMRT in this case, and the proton beam on the right. The proton beam is just a single beam going in to treat an area, and it gives most of its dose in that area. It's a very simple treatment. The device is not simple. This is showing a typical layout for a proton treatment facility. This protons come from a synchrotron, which is in the upper right-hand corner, and they take the beam of protons and put it through a long tube and bring it out in different treatment rooms. Here we've got 3 rooms, 2 big ones right to the left of the synchrotron and a littler one to the left of those. For comparison, to see how big everything is, in the lower part of this picture, in front of all of the hardware, are offices. And you can see how small the offices look compared to all the rest of the device space. They're also very expensive. Another treatment modality, other than external beam, and this one's brachytherapy. This is another picture you may have seen from advertisements for this talk. And it's me with a brachytherapy device. And I actually made much of my career in brachytherapy, which goes back to 1970, where back in 1970, brachytherapy was very crude. It hadn't changed all that much since the 1910s. But I was interested in it, and so in my residency, I did a number of cases. Also, during my residency, I started doing quality assurance on our machines, which was something new back then. When I came to Wisconsin, I got here in 1975, and I was working in the medical physics department doing some NHI study work. In 1977, I moved into the radiotherapy clinic, got a real job, as people said. And the director of medical physics called me in and said, "You have some experience in brachytherapy?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "And you have experience in quality control?" I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Nobody else wants to do those things. You're it." Which actually, it made my career path, and I've been very happy about it. Just looking at what they thought about quality assurance, the quality assurance program there was called Service Quality Assurance in Radiotherapy or Therapy, which had the acronym SQUAT. So it tells you what they thought. Brachytherapy is from Greek for brachy, short or close, and therapy means therapy. And this is where you put radioactive materials into or very close to tumors. And this is showing a picture where that penny is of some very small radioactive iodine seeds that are used for prostate implants. Approximately 3% of all cancer treatments are brachytherapy. I was looking at a slide that I was getting some information from making this talk, and I realized that slide said 10 to 20%. It's gone way down for reasons that we'll talk about in just a minute. Nowadays, we mostly use either these small types of sources for permanent implants. We'll put them in, just leave them in the patient. They don't cause any problems for being there, but they radiate the tumors and get rid of it. We also use a highly radioactive source, and those sources that are by the penny. They're not very radioactive individually. You need to put a bunch of them together in a prostate to actually irradiate. The alternative is having one very active source on a computer-controlled cable on a machine that will step through catheters that have been placed in a tumor and stop for just a few seconds at points that you've decided through computer optimization that it should stop to deliver a dose to the whole tumor. And this is called high dose rate brachytherapy, and it's a high dose rate machine that I'm standing in front of. Normal treatments are about 20 minutes. Normally, people would get about between 2 and 5 of those treatments. We have another way to classify other than low dose rate and high dose rate. We also have interstitial, which is where you actually put the sources in the tumor using needles or catheters. And that's shown in a prostate with the green arrow. Intracavitary, where you put the sources in an applicator that you put in the body cavity. Very common for cervix and uterine cancer. In this case, is shown with that. And the third type is surface applicator, used in skin, or this is showing treating an ocular melanoma in an eye, where the alternative is removing the eye, which doesn't preserve vision, obviously, whereas this does. We can compare external beam and brachytherapy. Mostly they use the same types of particles, X-rays or whatever. They do give, the brachytherapy sources use much lower energies than the external beam. External beam, we're trying to pump radiation deep in a patient. In brachytherapy, you're trying to deliver the dose to the patient from the inside going out. You don't want the stuff outside of the tumor to get a dose. And so we use lower energies there. They give very different dose distributions. The brachytherapy is much more conformal to the tumor. We have, usually we use it for well-localized, relatively small disease. If you have a big tumor, it's not so useful just because you can't project the dose out. You can't put all these needles in a patient. External beam is good for that. Generally, the courses in brachytherapy are shorter. I said about five fractions over a week is pretty normal, or 5 fractions spread out over a couple of weeks. Generally, external beam radiotherapy will typically have 25 to 35 fractions you have to come in for. Although nowadays they're coming down to fewer numbers because radiobiologically we can do some better tricks with getting the cells, the normal cells, to be less damaged, and the physics helps do that too. Interesting for those anatomies that brachytherapy is good for, the smaller tumors, the localized tumors, outcomes are better with brachytherapy than with external beam or with protons. It's really a very good treatment modality. It does take more physicians' time. They have to go into the operating room, they have to do this and that, they have to do a lot of planning beforehand. They actually have a patient in the hospital sometimes that they have to then go on rounds to see. All of that's one of the main reasons that the modality has been dwindling in its use. Even though outcome studies repeatedly, and even more recently, it looks even better, repeatedly show that brachytherapy is the best way to go when you can. Physicians really just don't want to go there. As a result, radiotherapy residents aren't really learning how to do this stuff, and you're having a smaller base of physicians who are able to walk into an operating room and do this. The American Brachytherapy Society, one of my many professional organizations, has started a program and is funding brachytherapy fellowships and trying to fund parts of residencies to travel to places to learn brachytherapy. They're actually having some success with getting more people into the field. The third modality in radiotherapy is nuclear medicine. Just like in imaging, in nuclear medicine, you have the radioactive material that goes to disease in the body. Radionuclear therapy or radionuclide therapy combines radioactive materials with some pharmaceutical that is designed to go to tumors. And so you combine them, you inject the radioactive material into the patient, and the body takes care of the rest of it, sorts things out. It's been around since the 1940s, and it started using radioactive waste from the reactors used in the Manhattan Project, used mostly iodine-131. Nowadays, we don't use the waste. We particularly make the materials for the use. And as I said earlier, lately the modality has really taken off. Modern radionuclide therapy makes use of theragnostics. Theragnostics is where you take a material that you're going to treat a patient with and give a little bit of it first. Then do an image such as what you see on the screen. From that image, you can calculate what dose you're going to give to each of those little spots that have taken up the radioactive material. And so you can then determine how much activity you have to administer to this patient to get an adequate treatment. You can also then follow up the treatment with imaging after you do the injection to see if everything goes where it's supposed to. And over a short period of time, you can do some follow-up imaging to look to see how long the radioactive material is staying in each of those target areas. Sort of a hybrid of both radionuclide therapy and brachytherapy is microbrachytherapy. This is the use of very small beads that you attach radioactive materials to. The picture is showing you some of the microspheres that we use compared to a human hair. That's the ugly looking thing that goes diagonally across. I don't know if they'd use conditioners or not with the hair. The microspheres are just about the right size to get to the capillaries. And an interventional radiologist will catheterize the arteries leading to a tumor and identify which arteries feed that tumor, and then inject the microspheres. The microspheres will go and get stuck in the capillaries in the tumor, irradiating the tumor cells that are very close. The range of the dose from these microspheres is relatively small, so you don't irradiate a lot of normal tissue as you're treating. Just as a final note, as far as what I do, and an increasing number of medical physicists do, is they're involved in patient safety and healthcare quality. I started working in 1988 with this because we had some medical events here, and we didn't know, we thought we had put in place steps to prevent them from ever happening again, and we happened to have them again. So we called in a team of industrial engineers from GE and a number of places from the university to look at what we were doing. And while actually that was not that useful, what was useful is that I learned a lot about the industrial engineering methodologies used for improving quality. And there was not a lot of interest at that time in the field of medicine altogether, in radiotherapy in particular. But in 2000, when the Institute of Medicine issued their report to Err is Human, looking at how much patient injury is due to what goes on in healthcare, accidents, errors, people started paying attention. Slowly, very slowly at first, but they started paying attention. In 2004, another one of my professional organizations, the American Association of Physicists in Medicine, formed a panel, TG100, that gave guidance for using risk analysis in reducing the risks and errors in radiotherapy. It finally got published in 2016. That took so long because so many people thought this is crazy and argued against it. It got edited over 8 years. It's really one of the best edited reports I've ever seen. And it gives one of the best manuals for how to develop quality management. We had to develop new techniques. The literature that was existent at the time only took you so far. And that wasn't enough to be able to tell people, go do this. So it was a lot of interesting work in coming up with that report. Just examples of some of the stuff: process maps, failure trees, things like that. So the status of system safety is many professional organizations do support this nowadays, officially. Say, this is what people should be doing. The government, as I said, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, has set up these patient safety organizations to try to help healthcare providers in applying these types of risk assessment and quality improvement techniques. And the Center for the Assessment of Radiological Sciences that I work with is one of them. So looking back, and this is the end of it, and I realize some of you probably finished long before I did. The biggest changes in medical physics since 1970 have been the computerization. We didn't have computers back then for a long time. We did everything by hand. We combined isodose curves from treatment machines to try and figure out what dose distributions would be. It took a long time. Artificial intelligence, it's a huge game changer now and will be much more so in the future. And we could certainly have a whole talk on that. Imaging modalities, we had x-rays and that was it. And now you have all those different modalities I showed you. Treatment machines, we had cobalt machines and that was it. Well, we also had x-ray machines that we were using. They were old style. Our increased precision and accuracy and the quality that we do now is just unbelievable back in 1970. We just have a much better understanding of everything. So that day in 1970 put me on a career path that I have just loved, and I wouldn't have changed that for anything. Here's just some of the stuff that I've been involved with, some of my research projects. I won't bother going into that because you've had enough of this stuff. Thank you. I think we have just a few minutes for a question. Hi, yeah.
So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about augmented reality for surgical.
Oh.
I think that'd be very interesting. Localization.
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Repeat the question.
Right. Thank you for reminding me of that too. That's quality assurance over here. She asked if I could talk about the augmented reality in surgery here. One of the biggest problems with breast cancer surgery is about a quarter of the time they have to bring the patient back and do a second surgery because they didn't get clean margins. And that's with all of the developments in surgical pathology. What this project does is it would inject radioactive material that's tied to a molecule that just goes to cancers, doesn't go to normal tissues. CLR 1404 is called. There's a test later. And in the operating room, the surgeon would don an augmented reality helmet, use a detector that we've developed to move the detector around the patient by hand, building up an image of the tumor that's superimposed, it's augmented because it's this synthetic image that's superimposed through clear visor so the surgeon can see the patient and the tumor superimposed on it that moves as the patient moves. They can get the best approach. They can see where the margins are going to be. After they take out the tumor, you also have a fluorescence and a fluorescence detector, and they can see if there's anything left behind. That's that project. Yeah.
So I have a question. You were talking about specifically in the area of radiotherapy. About residents not being trained in it and physicians not being as interested in doing it. And I'm wondering if you could talk some about the pressures that the insurance companies put on what choices the physicians have available.
The question succinctly is, can I address the limitations insurance companies have placed on the practice of brachytherapy that may be contributing to its dwindling use, right? Yeah, and that's been an off and on battle with the insurance companies. And that sometimes there was a time that they actually increased the reimbursement for brachytherapy, and the number of cases skyrocketed.
Imagine that.
And they said, oh, we're paying a lot of money for this. We didn't want to do that. And so they ratcheted the reimbursement back down and came close to killing it. Right now, it doesn't reimburse as well as external beam for the amount of time that physicians put into it. There also is the problem that there are different regions of the country that CMS, the agency that does the reimbursement, they have different rules in the different areas. Some of the regions can use an electronic form of brachytherapy, and some of the regions cannot. They won't get reimbursed. Reimbursement is just it's a real chaotic mess. And it's going to get worse for quality, because what's happened in hospitals is that, I'm doing editorial now, I'm sorry, is that when a patient comes in and is going to be an inpatient, the hospital gets reimbursed a flat fee based on the diagnosis, whatever they do for that patient. That turned out being that some places are still conscientious and doing a good job, other places just try and get by as cheaply as they can. They've just started, and this year is a test year with a third of the radiotherapy facilities included, applying the same model to radiotherapy, where they'll pay a radiotherapy facility a certain amount based on what tumor, what the disease is. What currently happens is the hospital or radiotherapy facility gets reimbursed for the physician's work, they get reimbursed for the medical physicists, they get reimbursed for the technology that you need. Now, the facility is just going to get a check. What they do with it is their business. Nominally, I didn't mean to bring that up. Nominally, they have to show that their outcomes are going to be as good as anybody else's. That's very hard to do. That's very hard to do. And in hospitals, it's been something that they haven't been able to do. They haven't been able to show that, along with maintaining limits on reimbursement, that the outcomes are the same. Anyway, that's a longer answer than you maybe wanted. Yeah.
Two things. First of all, what are some of the problems with finding the quality? And second, you said that they know what happens to the tissue that the radiation is coming through the normal tissue. Is it affected by whatever you're using?
The question is, what are some of the problems with quality assurance, and is normal tissue affected by the radiation going in to treat a tumor? The first one, what are the problems with quality assurance, is how to design systems such that you can pick up when things are starting to not be right. And this is what a lot of the work that we were doing in systems was working towards. We can do the mechanical and electronic quality assurance very well. We've got very tight tolerances on that. But when you throw people in and you're doing a process, having quality control active and quality assurance during the procedure is where things become much more difficult, and places are just working out how to design this. This is what the TG 100 report was about. The second part of the question is the tissue that the radiation goes through in order to get to the tumor affected by the radiation? And the answer is absolutely yes. And this is why we go to such length to try to focus high doses of radiation in the tumor and keeping the dose low throughout the rest of the body. The amount of radiation that you get outside of the tumor usually is not enough that it's going to cause problems. If you've got some sensitive organ nearby, that's when it gets to be a challenge. And that's where we spend a lot of effort, both in the physics and the imaging, to make sure that the radiation avoids those organs. So we do have to be careful of that. Normal tissues are damaged by radiation, and there will be some damage with any radiotherapy treatment. Our job is to minimize that and to keep it in places where it's not going to affect the patient.
You stop share just so that we can see you while you're talking.
Yeah, what do you want me to do?
So people,
Do
we
that.
stop the share, you keep going.
I didn't stop it, but it stopped. I see it.
Yeah.
Well, let's see, I can stop it here.
No, Deb's saying they stopped it.
Okay, good. Are there questions on Zoom that I'm missing?
So far not, just two
Oh.
very high compliments
Oh,
of a very informative presentation
oh, thank you.
and very clear.
Well, it's been fun from my point. Yeah, I can't speak for you. But any other questions here? Carla?
What would you predict 50 years from now that a person like you would be standing here and saying was the next greatest innovation?
50 years from now, well, what would be the status at 50 years that he or she would be projecting? And I'll point out, medical physics is one of the fields that has, as close as you'll find in science, to about an equal number of males and females. When I would teach medical physics at the university, I might go from a medical physics class with about equal numbers of men and women to go teach a nuclear engineering class where there would be 40 students in the room, 2 of whom would be women, if we were lucky. But anyways, I really digress on that one. The situation, I think, is going to be very much dominated by artificial intelligence. And I just saw last week that there was a study that was done over about an 8-year period. Actually, the study was done longer. Looking at the prediction that you could get from a CT study, of whether somebody is likely to have lung cancer in 6 years. And radiologists in the study, and this was done at 3 hospitals, NIH, it might have been Memorial Sloan Kettering, and I've forgotten what the third one was. The radiologists could not see anything in the x-rays that would be predictive of somebody getting cancer in 6 years. And they would look at the charts too. An artificial intelligence engine, looking at the same patients, looking at the same studies, looking at the same charts, have an 85% accuracy rate of predicting what's going to happen to that person in 6 years. A 98% accuracy predicting just 1 year. This is, in radiotherapy, artificial intelligence is being used now in treatment planning to optimize the radiation distribution. Is being used to plan drug routines. Is just making a massive start. And people are always wary about it in the beginning, as they well should be. But in all these things, artificial intelligence is doing better than people. So I would say 50 years from now, somebody up here is going to say, I remember when all they could use was artificial intelligence to do all this stuff. Now we've got something much better. Where are we going to go from there? I have no idea. As far as me, I'm having trouble figuring what I'm going to have for breakfast tomorrow. But obviously, artificial intelligence is going to be one of the main drivers of where we go. And unfortunately, just like in the science fiction movies, the artificial intelligence is designing the next artificial intelligence, and pretty soon we'll have Skynet in place. I think that's all I can't really do a better job on that. And now my brother in arms in nuclear medicine maybe has the last word to say.
Well, I'm glad you're speculating in the future. You know, if you just think about where we were 50 years ago, I was injecting indium-111 into pregnant baboons to look at the imaging of the uterus and fetal imaging, because we didn't have ultrasound to do that. We couldn't have CT or MRI because we didn't have the computer capability of making the calculations. Theoretically, we knew how to do it, but we couldn't do it then. So we've come an amazing way, and Bruce has guided people all along and done a splendid job doing it. Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.